They say the earth trembled the day he was born, that trees bowed low like servants, that rivers changed course to welcome him, and mountains dipped their heads in respect. In the far northern woods, under a sky streaked with lightning and snow, a child arrived. Not just any child. A child so big, so loud, and so legendary, the land itself would carry his name for centuries. This is the tale of Paul Bunyan. The man who didn't just walk through history, he carved it. It started with a tremor. In the deep wilderness of Maine, before roads, before fences, before men had fully mapped the woods, there stood a cabin. Weathered, crooked, and small. Inside, a woman gripped the edge of her bed with both hands and screamed not in pain, but in disbelief. He's too big," the midwife gasped, nearly fainting on the floor. The baby came out, wrapped in thunder and smoke. 10 feet long, 10 feet wide, and weighing more than a dozen grown men. When his father saw him, he fainted. Twice, the midwife tried to weigh him on the kitchen scale. It snapped in half. They laid him on a hay wagon instead and called it a cradle. By morning, the word had spread. A giant had been born. They named him Paul. And they soon realized they'd need more than just lullabies and diapers. They needed space. A lot of it. As a baby, Paul Bunyan cried like a thunderstorm. Windows cracked. Barn doors swung open. They had to build a new roof just to let his head rest upright. Feeding him was no small task. His mother milked 40 cows every morning. His bottles were made from hollowed-out logs, capped with stitched-together leather from 6 deer hides. By the age of 2, Paul was rolling across the countryside like a boulder. By 4, he could lift a plow with one hand and toss haystacks over the barn. By 6, he had single-handedly dug a pond just to have a bathtub. Neighbors complained. They said he scared the wolves, that his yawns triggered avalanches. One man claimed Paul's sneeze blew the roof clean off his house and into the next county. His parents tried to keep him indoors. They tried. But Paul wasn't made to be contained. He wandered into the forest, befriended owls, built forts from entire trees, and once mistook a bear for a teddy bear and brought it home. They called him a miracle. They called him a menace. But Paul? He just wanted to explore. When Paul turned 11, his father decided it was time for a proper tool. He didn't give him a knife or a saw. He gave him an axe. One forged from meteorite steel and hammered by 6 blacksmiths over 6 weeks. The moment Paul touched it, the trees seemed to flinch. His first swing cleared a 10-acre patch of forest. His second created a breeze so powerful it knocked a passing hawk from the sky. Paul didn't laugh. He didn't boast. He simply nodded and said, "I think I'll need a bigger one." That winter, the snow came hard and fast. The town was buried by morning. Men dug trenches to reach their roofs. But Paul? He waded through it like a pond. He wrapped himself in a patchwork quilt made from bear pelts, tied a tree trunk across his shoulders, and set out to rescue a farm full of frozen livestock. He carried 20 cows, one under each arm, and melted the snow beneath him as he walked. That was the first time the people of Maine realized Paul Bunyan wasn't just big. He was unstoppable. By 16, Paul had outgrown the forest towns, so he decided to build his own. A logging camp, but not like any other. His bunkhouse was a mile long. His cookhouse had a griddle so big, they used rowboats to flip the pancakes. His breakfast, 10 dozen eggs, 20 hams, a barrel of syrup, and enough flapjacks to cover a football field. Loggers came from all corners of the country to join his team. Tall men, short men, men who could juggle chainsaws and outrun bears. Paul welcomed them all, as long as they could keep up. There are winters, and then there was that winter. The kind of cold that cracks rock. The kind of snow that falls sideways. The kind of sky that turns the color of frozen steel. It was the coldest storm in 100 years. Even Paul Bunyan, the man who once used a pine tree as a toothpick, felt its bite. Snow fell for 3 weeks straight. Entire towns disappeared. The birds stopped flying. The wolves stopped howling. The forest went silent. Paul was trudging through the white abyss, axe strapped to his back, searching for stragglers and livestock. But what he found instead was something no one could explain. At first, he thought it was a glacier, a big one, glowing faintly, humming like a tuning fork. But then it moved. Paul blinked through the snowfall. There, lying in a drift as deep as a canyon, was an ox. An enormous ox. Its hide shimmered like moonlit ice. Its breath steamed out in blue mist. Its eyes, two lakes of frozen sky, locked on Paul, unafraid. The creature was shivering. Paul approached slowly. He knelt, which for him meant his knee dropped like a tree, and laid a hand on its back. The snow stopped falling. Paul whispered, "You're colder than the wind and bluer than the storm. But you're still breathing, friend." He hauled the ox over his shoulder, wrapped it in a tarp stitched from sailcloth, and trudged home. Took a week for the ox to stir again. A week of warm fires, hot broth, and Paul humming lullabies in a voice deep enough to shake icicles from the rafters. The ox finally rose, towering, trembling, but strong. It looked around the camp, then nuzzled Paul's shoulder with a low rumble that sounded like a mountain groaning. Paul grinned. "I'll call you Babe," he said, "because you're the biggest baby I've ever seen." And just like that, the legend grew twice as large. No one knows where Babe came from. Some say he was born in the heart of the Arctic, raised by northern lights and carved from a glacier. Others claim he was the last of the thunder beasts, ancient creatures that kept the skies turning and the storms in check, a walking force of balance between man and mountain. But Paul didn't care for the stories. He only cared that Babe stayed at his side, which he did for the rest of his life. Training a normal ox takes patience. Training a giant ox that can knock over trees by breathing takes creativity. Paul built a harness from the sails of 5 ships. He forged a yoke out of iron mined from a mountain. And then he taught Babe to haul logs, thousands of them, with the rhythm of a dance. They moved as one. When Paul swung his axe, Babe cleared the path. When Babe thundered forward, Paul leapt from boulder to branch, grinning like a kid. People came from miles around just to watch them work. They said it was like watching nature itself being tamed, with respect, not force. Soon, the camp could no longer contain them. Paul looked at the forest edge, then down at Babe. "Let's see what's beyond the trees," he said. "Let's see what we can make." They walked west, together. Behind them, forests cleared themselves. Mountains stepped aside. Rivers straightened into trails. They carved valleys, flattened plains, shaped lands that no one had ever dared to walk. By the time they crossed their 5th state, the stories had already begun to spread. A child in Wisconsin claimed he saw a blue blur streak across the sky. A farmer in Iowa woke to find every tree on his land neatly chopped and stacked, and a hoof print the size of a wagon. They became more than workers. They became myth. The land was raw, wild, waiting. As Paul and Babe marched westward, the terrain changed beneath their feet. Every step they took stirred the soil. Every swing of Paul's axe reshaped the earth. They weren't just moving through the wilderness. They were building it. One afternoon, as the sun melted across the horizon, Paul dragged his axe behind him. Just for fun, just to see what would happen. Behind him, a trench opened up. Long, winding, deep. Rainwater rolled into it. Then creeks. Then rivers. The people who settled there later called it the Mississippi. Another day, Babe grew tired and sat down to rest. The spot dipped. When he stood back up, the impression he left behind filled with rainwater, runoff, and mountain streams. That became the Great Lakes. Each one, a seat from Babe the Blue Ox. One summer, tornadoes came, fast, mean, twisting across the land like angry snakes. Most men hid, some ran. But Paul challenged one to a race. He planted his boots into the prairie, spat into the wind, and said, "Let's see who's faster, friend." The twister shrieked. Paul laughed. And together, man and storm, they tore across 5 counties. Babe galloped alongside, matching the wind spin for spin. Trees bent backward. Streams leapt from their beds. Clouds spun into swirls trying to keep up. In the end, the storm burned itself out in exhaustion. Paul just chuckled and wiped dust from his shirt. He didn't fear nature. He played with it, As more loggers joined Paul's camp, they ran into a problem. Breakfast. See, Paul believed no man should swing an axe on an empty stomach. But feeding hundreds of loggers wasn't easy, especially when Paul himself ate enough for 30. So he built the world's biggest griddle. It was so wide, the cook had to skate across it with butter strapped to his feet to grease the surface. They flipped pancakes with steam-powered cranes. Syrup was poured from barrels. And Babe licked the leftover batter clean with one sweep of his tongue. It was said you could smell breakfast 2 states away. Paul's camp became more than a workplace. It became a gathering of the most unusual, most skilled, most outrageous characters in the country. There was 7-Axe Sam, a man who could chop trees so fast you only heard the echo after the tree hit the ground. There was Hot Biscuit Bill, a cook whose biscuits were so tough they once stopped a charging bear. And Whisperin' Jake, who could shout orders across 3 valleys and still make it sound polite. Paul didn't just hire workers. He invited legends. He believed the land deserved the best, the strongest, wildest, most imaginative folk it could find. One dry autumn, a fire broke loose. A spark from a logger's pipe caught a dead pine. Wind carried it fast, too fast. Paul saw it from 5 hills away. He roared once. The sky answered with thunder. He grabbed 2 water towers from nearby towns, one in each hand, and poured them like teapots. Babe charged ahead, stomping fire lines into the dirt, digging trenches with his hooves. Together, they stopped a wildfire that could have scorched half a state. When it was over, Paul sat in the ashes and said softly, "The forest is ours to use, but not to destroy." The trees remembered those words. No one could chart where Paul Bunyan had been, not exactly, because his footprints weren't drawn. They were carved. Whole mountain passes bore the shape of his stride. Hills flattened into plateaus where he camped. Forked rivers twisted to follow the shape of Babe's horns. He didn't need a compass. He followed stars, clouds, and instinct. And wherever he went, stories followed like shadows. But not every tree was meant to fall. One day, deep in the Northwoods, Paul came upon a grove unlike any other. The air shimmered. The trees whispered, not in wind, but in words. Ancient, soft, sad. Paul raised his axe, paused, listened. He lowered it. That grove still stands today, protected by silence, guarded by the myth of a giant who once chose to let the forest speak instead of fall. It began with a whisper, then a rattle, then a roar of engines. They called him Iron Jack, a man made of gears and grit. Steam hissed from his spine. Sparks flew from his boots. He wasn't born. He was built. Part man, part machine, all business. He rolled into a town with a convoy of metal beasts, mechanical saws, logging tanks, drills that bit into bedrock. Faster, he said. Stronger, cheaper, cleaner. But the forest didn't cheer. It shivered. Paul Bunyan heard the rumors. He stood at the edge of his camp one morning, axe resting on his shoulder, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. "Looks like someone wants to race," he said. They set the challenge at sunrise. 3 forests, 3 days. Whoever cleared more land won. Iron Jack's crew worked like clockwork. Precise, ruthless, efficient. But Paul didn't rush. He swung slow, powerful, clean. Each tree he felt like it had been asked permission first. Babe pulled 20 loads at once, hooves thudding like thunder. The steam machines groaned and leaked and smoked. Trees cracked, metal screeched, oil spilled. When it was over, Iron Jack had cleared the most. But he had left behind ruin. Splintered ground, broken branches, silence. Paul's side? Clean stumps, replanted seeds, forest paths woven into the land like poetry. The judges didn't declare a winner. The trees did. They leaned toward Paul in the breeze. And Iron Jack rolled back into the fog, quieter than before. There came a day when no man could help. Not even Paul. A bridge snapped during a logging transport. 12 men stranded on the far side. A river raged below, swollen from spring melt. The canyon spanned wider than any leap. Paul paced, fists clenched. He could do a lot, but not this. Babe stepped forward. He bowed his head. and without a sound, he lay down across the canyon. The men walked across his back, one by one, boots shaking with each step. The last man turned and whispered, "Thank you." Babe rumbled low, and Paul's eyes misted over for the first time anyone could remember. That wasn't strength. That was love. The world was changing. Slow at first, then all at once. Railroads, engines, factories. No longer did men call for axes. They wanted steel, speed, control. Paul stood at the edge of his camp one night, watching a train snake across the valley like a fire-breathing serpent. Babe stood beside him, silent. "They're moving on," Paul said. "Don't need giants no more." The wind didn't argue. It just carried the train whistle further down the track. They had one last supper. Pancakes the size of trampolines, bacon in loops, syrup poured from water towers. But the laughter was softer, the stories fewer, the axes quieter. Paul told a tale none had heard before. Not even Babe. Of the first tree he ever chopped, of how it cried, and how he swore never to cut without reason again. Babe nuzzled close. Paul scratched his ears. And then he stood, looked at the fire, then at the stars. "Time we walked a little farther," he said. "Just you and me now." And together they left the camp behind. No one saw where they went. Some say they reached the top of the Rockies and just kept walking, right into the stars. Others say they sleep beneath the forest still, in a hidden grove where the wind hums their lullaby. And every so often, when the wind howls just right, when the trees shift in the dark, you might hear hooves, and a giant's deep, distant laugh. Years passed, then decades, then whole lifetimes, but the stories never stopped. A child in Oregon once said a man as tall as a tree helped him find his lost dog during a storm. A group of loggers in Canada claimed they saw a trail of steaming blue hoofprints in the snow, and not a single other track. A pilot flying over the Rockies swore he saw a man walking along a ridge, waving. No photos, no proof, only wonder. But when enough people speak the same myth with different mouths, sometimes, maybe it's more than a story. You can find Paul's name on maps, towns, statues, signs carved in weathered wood. Every state claims a piece of him. Bemidji, Bangor, Bangor again. Lakes shaped like boots. Trails too wide for wagons. Axes too big for museums. In some towns, they leave pancakes out on July nights, just in case he's hungry. Others carve ox tracks into sidewalks. And in one dusty corner of the Dakotas, a blue barn hums faintly when the wind's just right. It's not worship. It's remembrance. Paul Bunyan didn't die. You see, giants don't fade like men. They echo. He became the hush between trees, the crackle in campfires, the weight in your boots when you step onto untamed land. And Babe? Babe is the pulse in thunder, the low rumble before a spring storm, the blue shimmer in distant morning snow. You don't see them. You feel them. And that's the trick with legends. They stay long after they're gone. Paul wasn't just big. He used strength to build, not break. He swung his axe with care. He laughed loud, worked harder, and always left the land better than he found it. He welcomed misfits, respected the forest, and taught us that true power isn't in what you take, but what you leave standing. He stood for wilderness and wonder, for stories passed at fireside, for believing that sometimes the impossible might just be real. Paul Bunyan wasn't just a tale. He was a symbol of strength, of imagination, of American spirit. Some say he was made up, but others, they believe he's still out there, just beyond the trees. What about you? Speech Balloon, tell us in the comments. Do you think Paul Bunyan was real? And if you could ride with Paul and Babe for one day, where would you go? Pushpin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell. More legendary folktales are on the way.